And so within the congregation there is the exaltation of the cross of Christ, where we come together and individually look at that cross and embrace the saving benefits of that cross for ourselves through living faith. And together we proclaim the excellencies of the God who has saved us in our gathering together in worship. So the text is very much appropriate to what we do Sunday by Sunday. We gather for worship before the living God. Now look at how Isaiah develops the text here. In the second verse he talks about what it is that they will individually be saying. And he talks about how there was once a time when God was angry with the people of God. You were angry with me, but you turned your anger away. And you instead comforted me. This message of the people of God reflects their understanding of what has occurred in their own experience. How God has changed their lives for the better. A transition has occurred from wrath to grace. From the anger of God that rested upon the people of God to grace, where they are comforted. And Isaiah puts these words in the mouths of the people of God because it will be their personal confession and experience. We've known the fact that God once was angry with us. And in making that comment, they're not expressing anger with God or resentment with Him, that He was angry with them. They're not challenging God's right to be angry with them. They are accepting that as what they deserve because of their sin. You were angry with me, and rightly so. Now that is a confession that is difficult for people to come to. One, to acknowledge that God is in fact angry, and that He's rightly angry with me. We have a hard time accepting that. In our modern world today, in modern theology, we explain that all away. We take the whole concept of the wrath of God or the anger of God, and we just say that that's a product of that ancient barbaric past. And we have drifted beyond that. We've advanced beyond that. And so the anger of God is toned down and softened. And God is much more loving in our advanced understanding of God. God has evolved over time. He's become the sensitive God, sensitive to us and to our needs. And so the whole idea of an angry God seems like an ugly thing to the modern mind, and we reject that whole notion. We've spoken about this a few weeks ago, how the anger of God is a fact. It's a reflection of God's justice and His response to human sin. He must be angry with sin and must punish it. But at the same time, Isaiah talks about how this anger is directed personally to individuals, to you. God was angry with me. And if you're able to say that with a genuine confession, it's because you've acknowledged the fact that you have sinned, that your sin is of such evil that it deserves God's anger and wrath, and that there is nothing that you could have done to dispel that anger, that God Himself would have to make a change in your situation. Here the people of God say, you were angry with me, but you turned your anger away and turned to comfort me. God's anger made a transition. Well, what accounts for that transition from anger to grace, to comfort? Again, the modern mind has no explanation for that other than to deny the fact of anger in any case. But this transition from anger to grace is not to be explained by the fact that, well, God can be angry for only so long, and after a while He gets tired of being angry, and then He begins to show love. No, we are dealing with an infinite God whose reserve of strength is unmatched and is certainly not exhausted by finite creatures. And so God's anger is not exhausted, does not just let go of it. God does not simply say, okay, well that's enough, I will forgive you. Rather, Isaiah is quietly pointing to the transition that must occur. How God's anger must be satisfied. And it is satisfied in the mediator, in Jesus Christ. Now, Isaiah will explain that further later on in this prophecy. Especially in the 53rd chapter, where he talks about this servant of the Lord, this lamb, who is punished for our sin. That is how the transition occurs. God's wrath must be satisfied. His just demands must be met. Otherwise, He's no longer just, and He's no longer God. They're satisfied in the mediator, Jesus Christ. They're satisfied in the one who as a banner is lifted up at the cross. It's there that the wrath of God is met. The Messianic King is the suffering servant on behalf of the people of God. And there in this banner of exaltation, we see Christ apparently in His weakness, suffering death for you and I, so that He might provide this transition from wrath to grace. Now Isaiah, in talking about this transition, talks about how God comforts the people of God. And that word comfort is a word which reminds us of Noah's father, who named Noah Noah because he was hoping for God's comfort for the earth in its sufferings under the curse, under the sins of the world. God would comfort His people in Noah in providing an ark of salvation in him. And God brings us comfort in the form of His salvation, in the form of deliverance. This Noah comfort, which rested on Jesus, the provision of the Spirit on Him, comes upon us and rests on us. God turns to us in favor and brings us comfort, peace, and rest. What is the root of, or the source of this comfort? Well, it is the confession of the people of God that God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. He is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. There is that personal aspect to this again. It is my salvation that Isaiah is talking about. My personal grasping of this gift of God. This way of salvation. And note that Isaiah says that God is my salvation. Many today do not appreciate the need for salvation. On my drive over to church this morning, there was a couple out walking their dog. Another woman walking her dog. Somebody sitting out in their driveway. I don't know if they were having a garage sale or just enjoying a summer day. Another couple earlier in the day were jogging out in front of the house. Everybody's out enjoying the day, having a good old time, taking advantage of the blessings of life. They're looking for satisfaction in these earthly things. These things are passive. They're like that glass of water that refreshes for a moment. Then you need it again and again. And what is more, they're paying no attention to the real need that they have. Their need for salvation. Their need for refreshing from God.